Hello, Potomac Crossing Ward. We're covering Mosiah 7, 8, 9, and 10 in this week's Come Follow Me lesson. And these four chapters form two bookends. 7 and 8 form a bookend, and then we go back in time with 9 and 10. Brings us back to the beginning of this splinter group. So we have the end of the splinter group and the beginning of the splinter group in the text. So first we'll do 7 and 8, and then we'll switch over and do 9 and 10 afterwards. And I'll try to stop shaking the laptop here because that must be pretty annoying to watch. So with some general comments on Mosiah 7 and 8. With these chapters, we discover the fate of a splinter group of Nephites which left the main body some 80 years earlier to return to the first land that the Nephites settled after their split with the Lamanites. So this takes us back to the book of Omni, chapter 1, 27 through 30. The events in these chapters overlap with those of chapter 1, Mosiah 21, the main difference being the point of view of the speaker. We learn in chapter 21, the remnants of the splinter group have turned righteous in their afflictions and are praying for delivery. We see that in 21:14 through 15. This delivery manifests itself in the form of a search party from the main body of the Nephites. It's interesting to note that in chapter 7, verse 1, Mosiah sends out the search party out of irritation because people are bugging him. Mosiah is not inspired to do this. And in fact, he kind of drags his feet, and it's the pestering of people to go after this other group to find out about them. So this seems like a case of being uninspired or de-inspired. This group of people, this Nephite splinter group, needed time to repent, needed time to come around. So the Lord was in no rush to encourage Mosiah to send this group to go out and find them. So these two chapters very much put the historical events and present situation of the people into the context of practical theology. The present leader, King Limhi, recognizes they've broken the commandments and are suffering for it, so they need to take corrective action or face destruction. So King Limhi explicitly draws the connection between themselves and the consequences of violating the covenant theology of their fathers. So King Limhi recognizes very plainly that his father Noah was a wicked man, and they weren't doing things the right way. Now, one point of interest is why did Zenith in this group want to go back to the land of Nephi in the first place? What was the motivation? And unfortunately, the text doesn't tell us. It doesn't come out and say, well, we wanted to go occupy the land because this. The two kind of hints in the text are in chapter 7, verse 16. The Ammon search party, it says Ammon search party suffered hunger, thirst, and fatigue. So if they went out into the woods, traveling to go find this missing land where these people have gone off to, you would think that they would prepare better and they would have plenty of food and water and bow and arrow and all this. But if they're still suffering hunger, thirst, and fatigue, this kind of makes me wonder if there's a drought in the land. And if there's this kind of long-running drought, then perhaps the people of Zarahemla were like, hey, maybe we should go back to the land of Nephi because we know that the land of Nephi was, had good agricultural lands and the cities are already built, and if we can take this over, then maybe it'll be a better agricultural area. The other possibility could be that they just want to secure a firm, defensible southern border against Lamanite incursions. It's been a few years since the Lamanites have attacked them, but it's been repeated that as the time goes on, the Lamanites come back in and attack because they want to plunder them. So if they have this firm southern border with a defensible city that's already got a wall, then that's affording them a clear southern boundary that's defensible. So, I mean, you have a couple things there that might be an issue of why these guys wanted to go back and get the land. Okay, so let's take a look at, I guess that's my general comments on chapter 7 and 8. The rest of the text is pretty straightforward. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of complexity there. It reads pretty straightforward what's going on. And then some general comments on 9 and 10. Chapters 9 through 11 backtrack chronologically from where chapter 8 ends, returning us to the events of Words of Mormon, chapter 1, verses 12 through 14, and Omni 1, 27 to 30. As such, a considerable amount of Nephite history is filled in. The narrative is told from the point of view of Zeniff, the original Nephite leader of the splinter group we have been reading about in the previous chapters. Aside from the history, the chapters paint a picture of a group of people who are not particularly spiritual, but whose afflictions chastened them and brought them to remember the Lord. They're led by a man who fears the Lord and confess their weakness before him, and thus the people prosper under his leadership. This sets the stage for the subsequent chapters where Zeniff's son Noah takes over the leadership and then drags them down into apostasy. The result is we have a sharp contrast between Zeniff and his son Noah as leaders and the impact a single man can have on a whole population. Now, it's clear that Zeniff and his grandson Limhi have a pretty solid understanding of Old Testament covenant theology, and both of them fear the Lord. Both explicitly speak about it at length in the document, in the text that we have. Noah obviously does not follow his father's example, but how Limhi ended up being a man of God isn't hinted at the text, other than him acknowledging the bad example of his father Noah. Now, the one thing I have to wonder is how long did Zeniff live after passing on the kingship to Noah, his son, and when was Limhi born? So, did Limhi spend some time with his grandparents so that connection was made? And did, King Zeniff spend some time teaching Limhi? Like he taught Noah, but Noah went bad as an adult. But maybe Zeniff and Limhi spent some time together, and Limhi was influenced by Zeniff, and then if Limhi is influenced by Abinadi's prophesying, then that would have brought him back to his grandfather Zeniff. So it's just kind of, these are gaps in the text that make you wonder what's going on behind the scenes. Another quick comment, Zeniff's account in chapter 9 through 10 is in the first person. It appears Moroni copied it verbatim from Zeniff's own record. This is in contrast to the following chapters dealing with King Noah. There, obviously, Noah isn't going to document his apostasy and talk about how he loves concubines and prostitutes and how he just loves murdering prophets of the Lord. So the account of Noah shifts from first person to third person as Mormon takes over as the editor to convey the story. I think that's pretty obvious if you're paying attention at all. Okay, so on to Mosiah chapter 9. So we have this setup where the invading group of Nephites come, and there's at least 100 of them. We don't know exactly how many, but it's said that 50 return to the land of Zarahemla after the internal struggle, and they were killing each other. And Zeniff says that the greater part of the army was killed, so there had to be more than 50. How many more, we just have no idea. So there's at least 100 guys. But in any case, the invading army apparently expects the land of Nephi to be populated by the Lamanite military in the city of Nephi. But instead, they send Zeniff off to and some other guys as spies to go into the land to see what's going on. And then it turns out that there is no Lamanite military present, and Zeniff sees that the people there are not, they don't pose any military threat, and it's really no big deal. So he doesn't want to march in there and slaughter the Lamanites. Now, we would assume from this that if the Lamanites are just kind of hanging out, and then Zeniff ultimately asks for permission to take over the land, and then the king says, yeah, sure, I'll tell my people to clear out. This suggests pretty strongly that the Lamanites at this point have not turned to an agricultural society where they're staying put. It suggests that the Lamanites are still hunter-gatherers. Because if the people just up and leave and let this other group come in and take over the city, then clearly they don't have any crops in the ground. They haven't invested any effort building up the city and making houses or building them up as a permanent settlement. So if they're willing to get up and go at the king's behest, the chances are they haven't put any roots down, which suggests that they're still hunter-gatherers. Which would suggest why they just don't care about the city of Nephi. But Zeniff goes back and he says, "Hey, I went among the Lamanites, and these people are nice. They're not going to, which suggests they're not military. We shouldn't kill them." And then they have the whole battle, and then people go back to Zarahemla and they say, "Hey, this is what happened." And then he gets some more people, and then they go back up there, and then Zeniff goes into the city and asks the king for permission. Now notice in chapter 9, verse 5, Zeniff says, "I went again into the city." Now Zeniff says he goes in as a spy, and then it says he went again into the city. This suggests that he had already been in the city, scouting it out as a spy. So this suggests to me that Zeniff was in there among the Lamanites talking to them. And then we see in the next chapter that Zeniff recounts the Lamanite version of the history of how they were wronged in the wilderness, and Nephi stole the plates, and Nephi stole leadership of the people, and Nephi stole the Liahona, and they were wronged over and over and over again. So clearly Zeniff at some point had been speaking with the Lamanites well enough to get their point of view, which suggests that the first time that, or maybe it's even the second time, but Zeniff went and spent time among the Lamanites and got their version of the story. They got their side of the story so that he understood their point of view. So Zeniff, this suggests pretty strongly that he went and he spent some time with them and really got to know them. As a spy, he went in there and probably broke bread with them and spent time with them and really got to know them. So again, verse 5, "I went again into the city and spent some time with them, talking to them." And then he gets permission from the king to go and get permission to move in there. Now, it seems unlikely that the king of the Lamanites is actually living there. So maybe when he says king of the Lamanites, he means like the political leader over that area. Or maybe there were some runners going back and forth, running all the way back to the actual king back in the Lamanite lands. But it doesn't seem likely that Zeniff himself would run all the way back to the Lamanites king in the land of the Lamanite land. So it's not clear here if he's talking to the local leader, or if they're running, have runners going back and forth to get permission to have them leave. But in any case, that's just another one of those interesting details we don't have enough information about. Going through my notes here, and then in Mosiah chapter 10, things get ugly again. King Laman dies, and his son takes over, and he stirs up the people against Lamanites, and then they start to invade again because they want to pillage all their flocks and food and stuff. And then things get ugly. And then we see that in the first round of battle, Zenith just basically pulls together whatever weapons they have on hand. So that's going to be bows and arrows and slings, which they already had for hunting. And then clubs would be basically anything you could pick up and hit somebody with. So that's an improvised weapon. And then he talks about scimitars or scimitars. That could be just simple hand scythes repurposed as a weapon to slice somebody up. And then later, after that first big invasion in the battle, that's when they start to militarize, and they have guards, and they start producing weapons intentionally as weapons. So we see that in the text. And then we see Zenith hand off the kingship to Noah with really very little detail there. We learn nothing about Noah. Like with the case with King Benjamin passing things on to his son Mosiah, there's a lot more detail, and we find out that Mosiah went to great efforts to educate his sons and make sure to bring them up right and to lead them correctly. And here we get no detail at all about the transfer from Zenith to Noah, and Noah just goes bad. So again, it just leaves a lot of questions in your head, like what happened with Noah? Why did this happen? But in any case, this is what happens, and we're left to speculate. So we'll pick up with chapter 11 next week.